So we will move on to introduce our amazing panelists for today. We'll go ahead and get started. I'll start with Janice O'Keefe. So Janice is a Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Program Manager at Citizens. In her current role, she oversees programs that continue to shape an inclusive and innovative environment across the bank. She also serves as strategic advisor to the bank's 7 business resource groups, helping them to identify opportunities to drive business outcomes and execute programs that engage the bank's colleagues in their DEI efforts. Prior to her work in DEI, O'Keefe was responsible for directing the bank's corporate social responsibility program and reporting since 2017. She joined Citizens in May of 2011 as the New York Public Affairs Director, responsible for the bank's charitable contributions, community outreach, philanthropic activities, marketing sponsorships, and media relations across the state. Previously, she spent 15 years at Philip Morris and its parent company, Altria Group. During her tenure, O'Keefe directed the national public affairs activities of the company, including consumer affairs, charitable giving, trade and business relations, regional government relations, and legislative advocacy programs. O'Keefe earned her Bachelor's of Arts magna cum laude at Fordham University in political science and received her master's in public administration from the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. She has served for 10 years. She served for 10 years on the board of the Trinity Alliance of the Capital Region. Next we have Ellen Bailey. Ellen, in her tenure at Harvard Business Publishing, has held several positions and is currently the Vice President of Business and Culture Transformation. Ellen created and executed the first diversity and inclusion strategy, vision, and goals, and continues to drive employee engagement and business results by serving as a catalyst to discover, develop, and deliver the best practices and resources needed to promote a culture of inclusivity. In addition to her work at HBP, Ellen supports leaders outside of HBP by serving as a catalyst to develop and deliver best practices, promoting sustainable results. Ellen is on the Women's Leadership Board for the Harvard Kennedy School Women in Public Policy Program, faculty at the McKinsey Black Executive Leadership Program, an expert for the Women's CoLab Program, and more. Ellen regularly publishes expert briefs and blog posts on topics such as D&I, the multi-generational workforce, and the future workforce, and is frequently a host, contributor, and speaker on podcasts and webinars. And lastly, Erica Van Steen is the Senior Director at MLT. She currently leads the Experienced Talent Network, a platform changing how organizations build their workforce with diverse professionals. She previously established MLT's advisory services business, where she joined this leading racial equity nonprofit in 2019. Erica is working to advance social impact and systemic change in the areas of gender, race, sustainability, and public services. She recently served on the Partnership for Public Service Federal Racial Equity Advisory Board, and previously the Social Value US Founding Board of Directors. She currently serves as a board member for Sintonia DC, an award-winning nonprofit demonstrating how to make world-class bilingual early childhood education affordable and accessible. Erica is certified in many things. She's a certified DE&I practitioner. She's certified in global human capital. She's certified in data visualization, impact and outcomes assessment, survey design, design thinking for business, survey psychology. She is an alumna employee of the Partnership of Public Service, Bose, UK Parliament, and a boutique consulting firm, Heron. She earned her Master's of Science in Social Policy from the London School of Economics, Center of Analysis and Social Exclusion. She's a member of Phi Beta Kappa in the honors of sociology and English Lit from the University of Wisconsin. She also has a beautiful young family and resides in Washington, D.C. So thank you all for providing such extensive resumes. You all are doing so many things, so many tongue twisters for me, but really excited for you all to share all of these experiences with the folks here on the call today. So before we get started, like I said, I want to thank you for taking the time to participate today. My goal of this conversation is to facilitate space for us to collaborate and create community. We are all working to solve big issues. I'm going to attempt to come back on camera, see how that works. We are all here to solve really big issues. And so my hope is that by you all sharing your process of how you thought about this, how you're solving, that folks on the call are able to either take some of those findings and insights back to their organizations as they solve, or for folks who are not in those positions, but maybe are experiencing some of the things that we've identified, they're able to have language to be able to take it back to their organizations. So in thinking about all the things that you have done, right? So as I mentioned with your extensive resumes, you are all leaders in this space. You've been thinking about this work. I've often found that folks who are in the DE&I space have a very interesting journey on how they ended up in the space. Folks are often starting in somewhere else and ended up in this space or made a pivot at some point. So in thinking about your journey, I'd love to hear from each of you how you ended up thinking about solving these century-old issues that are showing up here in the US. And I'll start with Ellen. We'll go to Janice and end with Erica.
Absolutely. So to your point, I actually did not start out in this space. I'm a fairly new practitioner and moved into this space, started making the shift in 2019 and early 2020. And I did it solely because I felt at HBP that we needed to be better at doing the things that we publish about, to be quite frank. And so it's one of those things where we are so focused on getting the great thought leadership to put out to the world that we don't take a look at our own organization, right? And it's like we often neglected ourselves, and we grew very rapidly, but didn't think about how we grew. And so I started getting some formal education in the diversity and inclusion spaces, what we called it back in 2019, to help as a leader in this organization in our corporate learning side of the house, to help us shift kind of from the inside out and start putting into place some of those best practices that we know exist. And so I actually started doing that work, like I said, 2019, early 2020. And then, of course, we know what happened in 2020, which then kind of propelled me into this role. But what I continue to find most helpful is honestly that I kind of came from the business side. And so it does make me think about this a bit differently as far as this work as a business imperative and crucial to the overall success and health of the organization. So that's a little bit about my journey and how I got into this.
Awesome. Janice?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me on. I am also a new DE&I practitioner, probably newer in the space than most of the folks on the call. I started my role in DE&I just about a year ago at Citizens, though I've been with Citizens for a long time. My background, as you heard Shannon talk about, is more in the public affairs, community engagement space, philanthropy space. But for the past probably 4 or 5 years before I came into this role, I was really shepherding our ESG work and our corporate responsibility reporting. And I very proactively sought out a role helping to lead our DE&I work because I was engaged in it through committees and through our business resource groups, and certainly talking about it a lot in our ESG work. But I just decided, I want to be in it and helping to think it through and advance the work versus just sort of reporting on it on the other side, on the ESG side. So proactively sought out the opportunity to help lead the work at Citizens, and has been a really significant learning journey for me over the last year. And I'm probably still in the early stages of that journey, as most of us probably are. But it's been great. I'm so happy that I decided to kind of move into this space, and really excited about some of the work we're doing and some of the work that we have ahead.
Awesome. Erica?
Well, I think my two fellow panelists are probably being too humble about all of the work that they have done so far. So kudos to both of you for being in this work every day. My origin story goes back long ago to just being a kid, a white girl in a family that had some diversity in it. So I had family members experiencing different things for me, and it never quite made sense at all. So sort of accidentally, right, I ended up being a formally trained sociologist and social policy person, where my emphasis was in how institutions work to drive equity, inclusion, dignity, and respect for the people in them, and how partnerships are so integral to achieving those outcomes. So much of my career has been meandering, but that has been the core of it all. And I'm very grateful to have been at MLT at the start of our institutional work back in 2019. And grateful to be here and part of the conversation today. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. And just a double click, I'm intentionally focusing on journey here because I believe that it's so important for us to recognize where we're all pulling, where our experiences are pulling from, especially when we're thinking about racial equity, diversity work. So thinking about Ellen and Janice, your journey. So you both mentioned that you're fairly new to the space, right? You come from a business position and you've moved into the DEI space. So I'm curious to know your company's journey to getting to the place of deciding to work on this, but then also deciding to partner with MLT to tackle this work. And this time we'll switch. So I'll start with Janice, end with Ellen.
Okay, so we have done DE&I audit work, and we've evaluated quite a few programs to sort of help us advance the work that we have underway. We decided to participate concurrently in the Black Equity at Work and the Hispanic Equity at Work certification programs, really because we're really interested in influencing the policies, the procedures that are in place, that are really and drive change that's going to create systemic change across our environment. So we really want to poke holes in everything that we're doing. I think we probably are pretty familiar with where we have gaps, right? Where we have gaps from a representation standpoint, from a culture standpoint, from an external investments and contribution standpoint. We sort of know where we do well and where we don't do well. So that's not the real learning here. I think the real learning is and you've talked about this, but really getting underneath that, the root causes, like what are the factors that are leading us to have those gaps? And what is the reason behind those factors? It's like you have to keep going down that next level of why. And that's the work, I I think that we are really excited about doing. I will share that we are pretty early in our process with the certification program. We completed our baseline, and I'm happy to talk more about that process. And we are just kicking off our plan now and starting that process of identifying and articulating those root causes and figuring out where we're looking to sort of move the dial based on our baseline assessment. So my experiences are sort of just up until that point, but I'm happy to talk more about where like what our thinking was and where we hope to go with it. But that's a little bit of what brought us to the certification programs.
Yep, we'll dig into the process in a couple secs. Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, sure. So I think, probably to date, the hardest challenge I've had to overcome was to get to participate in the MLT program, and not with MLT, with our internal stakeholders. And so what appealed to me personally immediately, because when we first signed on and applied to be part of the program, I was a team of one. And what appealed to me was MLT has done such a great job of what good looks like. And for an organization like ours that is steeped in research, that's exactly what we needed, right? Because yes, I had some formal education in this space, but a lot of what I was proposing to our president and executive team was what I thought we needed to be doing. And so this gave it validity. It's like, oh, yes, for sure, these are the things that we need to be doing. And selfishly, I was thrilled when I saw the 5 pillars because they aligned exactly with our pillars. I was like, okay, at least we're thinking about this the right way. But most importantly, MLT has set the bar on what good looks like. So now we just have to go. And I'm embarrassed to say that even though I had presented a business case to one of our executives early 2020 before George Floyd was murdered, it did take that. And I am horrified that it did, but it did. And so we are one of those organizations that they were like, oh yeah, thanks, Ellen, that's great. And then as soon as George Floyd was murdered, they were like, oh, yeah, that you shared back in February, let's talk about that. And I was like, okay, so it actually took that for Harvard Business Publishing to be able to honestly make some significant progress. What I will say really quickly though is, yeah, like once I sold it, and once we had folks on board, then we've just been pushing the gas pedal and we haven't come off. So it's been great. It just took the mindset shift on the reasoning of why.
Yes, and I will now echo Erica's initial sentiment in that Ellen is one of my partners. So I can also say I see the work and there are real results. So yes, Harvard is definitely doing what needs to be done in this space. So thinking about tying in all of your journeys to get to the space, to get to the point of thinking about these big questions, right? I'm curious now to tie in what Crystal talked about in our first hour. So this is specifically for Erica, as Erica, you are the leader, you've been the leader of the 2 sister teams that kind of float in the orbit around racial equity, right? I'm curious to know, in the time that you've worked with partners kind of tackling these issues, your initial thoughts on the information that Crystal shared. Specifically curious to know, what are some of the root causes that you've identified with partners as you've kind of taken them through earlier versions of this journey?
Thanks, Shannon. And I'm going to answer this question by first acknowledging something, which is that I'm really fortunate enough to have had folks with lived experiences other than my own who've shared those experiences and insights with me directly and with MLT. And it's because they've done that these root causes can see light. It's through their trust and persistence. in this work and their candor in this work that we're able to even have conversations like this today. So with that acknowledgement, Crystal and Nise, the insights that you shared, particularly the root causes, I'm actually going to take one level down. How do you foster a sense of belonging and create more clarity on a path to growth and promotion? Those are, two core root cause issues that if you can solve for them, right, can also solve for some of your retention challenges. But I think these root causes and any others that you might uncover at your own organization really can be boiled down into 4 things that underrepresented talent need to thrive and stay: transparency, fairness, flexibility, and connection. It's those 4 things. These are things that any of your employees, underrepresented or otherwise, are going to need and will benefit from. But underrepresented talent, particularly those who live at the intersections of historically marginalized categories, experience the lack of these things at your organization more acutely and with longer term effects across their careers and their individual sense of confidence. So looking through that lens, when you're trying to understand what your root causes are and what your solutions are going to be to solve for those things, is really important. URT are looking for transparent, fair, flexible, and connective leaders. And they are also seeking organizations that reward and systematize those things. So it has to be 2 sides of that coin for your solutions, right? You have to enable leaders to build these skills and to demonstrate and be held accountable to them. And you also need to integrate and systematize those things within your organization. So let me just quickly define, and then I'll be quiet. But transparency is things like, we hear from underrepresented folks, what does it take to get promoted? How do people get hired here? How do they get sponsored and mentored and chosen for those career accelerating assignments? Right? That's what people want when we say transparency. But it's also things like pay equity. If you as an organization know that there's a gap, or if you know that there's some sort of policy gap that isn't serving a portion of your employees, don't hold that at the top of the organization. You need to share that discovery with your people. Fairness. This is really straightforward, actually. It's about having a fair chance of success, fair pay for work that's done. And when you look at some recent research that I just want to mention, January 2023, there was a study published in the APA Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that found that the language of fairness was more likely to drive belonging than the business case for diversity among URT. So this fairness piece, this fairness component, I don't think we talk about enough, right? Because it's not that underrepresented folks are asking for an unfair advantage, a leg up, or anything like that, right? What they're asking for is a fair chance of success, transparent information that is distributed equitably across the organization, resources distributed equitably across the organization, mentorship and sponsorship, those career accelerating opportunities distributed fairly across the organization. Flexibility and choice, that's about benefits, where and how they work. Again, MLT was partnered with the Future Forum between 2020 and 2022. Our research showed that remote and hybrid workers felt more engaged than their on-site counterparts. That still holds true in the recent Gallup data. And there were historically high levels of engagement for working mothers in URT. So I don't think we can talk about retention without talking about that kind of elephant in the room of 2023, where many of you might be feeling pressure from your organizations to do a return to office or a return to hub mandate. And so I like to pair flexibility with choice. So when you're looking at root causes around retention, whether you frame it as choice or flexibility, what this is about is trusting your people. This is about saying, you're included in the social contract that binds you to us. You have a right to express preferences for where and how you work. what benefits are available to you, and we can have a conversation about that to maximize what you're bringing to this organization and what the organization can give to you in return. The last piece of this that I'll just share is on connection, which is such a crucial and I would say sort of central component to all of this. So in my work at MLT, I talk a lot about career enhancing networks. With our fellows at MLT, we often talk about cultivating a personal brand, a personal board of directors. It's usually all informal. Stephanie, you had asked the question earlier about representation, like, is it that simple to drive culture and connection, which can be hard to build and maintain when you feel like you're one of one or one of few? You know, is representation like that secret trick? And again, only 89% of 89% of URT have felt like they've been or have been one of one on their team. Stephanie, you shared only 24% of leadership positions in consumer finance are held by women, right? So connection isn't something that can just happen overnight, and it's not something that all of your organizations or even your sector is equipped to solve for. So that's why that career enhancing network work, why that informal network work is so crucial to retention. That's why forums like this are so important. We found at MLT that when you have a strong internal network at your organization as an underrepresented person, you're 2.5 more times likely to have confidence that you belong. So you can't underestimate how important it is to actually systematize connectivity between people. And I can give you a case example later if you'd like one. But going back to those root causes that Crystal and Nish shared, if you look through any of those other root causes that might exist around retention at your organization through this lens of how do we drive transparency, how do we drive fairness, how do we drive flexibility, how do we drive connection, you're going to see absolute results when it comes to retaining your talent.
Awesome. That was an amazing mini lecture you gave, Erica. I'm hoping folks took note there because you had a lot of nuggets. So appreciate you for sharing. I'm going to pivot to Ellen and Janice. So I'm curious, Erica has done shared with us. Curious to know in your engagement with the process as you've been thinking about establishing your root causes and activities. And I know that for citizens, you all are early in your process, but curious to know what are some of the root causes that you've identified as you've been thinking about this? Have they been in alignment with some of the things that Erica shared? Are there things that are unique to each of your organizations that you want to highlight? And we'll start with you, Ellen.
Sure. So it absolutely starts with the fairness piece of it, and that is where we started. So we wanted to make sure that we infused all things diversity, equity, and inclusion to all of our people practices, and that's when we started. So as we're looking at the 18 measures, of the 5 pillars that you have with MLT, it was like, okay, we can't do all 18 at once. And so where do we start? So we started with all things people practices. And so I say that then because we made sure that we completely redid purpose, mission, all of our values became our individual competencies, and those then get measured quarterly because we know, to your point, Erica, what gets measured gets done, and that holds people accountable. And then we also completely redid, like actually kind of, threw out the old and started fresh. Thank goodness some of my HR partners on making sure that we had objective career ladders and career advancement and potential that was equitable for all. And it was less than on the less reliant on subjectivity of a boss on who gets promoted, but it's based off of capabilities and capabilities and our competencies, which are now our values, as well as the potential. And so that takes a lot of the subjective piece out of it to make sure that it's objective and based on facts. So if you want to go from a level 3 to a level 4, regardless of who you are or what team you're on, you have to meet these minimum things. And so that has really gone a long way. And we saw that, we heard that loud and clear in our employee surveys, that, you know, those who get promoted best deserve it. And it's like, oh yeah, no, we didn't fare so well on that. So that's where we started on the people practices. And I have to say, being part of the HR team at the time and being able to truly collaborate on those endeavors has been fantastic. And I think that's probably what has gained us the most ground, so to speak, as far as progress.
And for Janice, a bit of a thank you, Ellen. For Janice, I know you haven't started the process, so I'm actually curious, for many folks who have not maybe started the process, how are you thinking about getting to the root cause? Are there some things you already kind of have in your mind, some theories that you want to test out? I'm curious to know where you are in the process.
Yeah, so, and we are really just at the beginning of it. I can tell you that I took a whole page of notes when Erica was talking, because I found that way of thinking about it so helpful. You know, I think one of the things that I'm realizing and realized through sort of the baseline process is, you know, especially when I look at the materials that MLT has given us about how to develop, like, what does a good root cause look like versus one that's not so good, which is more superficial and, you know, like, well, you know, we don't have a pipeline. And then like the simple statements that don't really kind of dig down the next few levels of the why on things. One of the things I'm realizing is, in some cases, as much data as I feel like we track, and we do a big organizational health index survey every year, and we look at that by all these different, I'm not 100% sure. I think part of our beginning work might be on what are we asking and what are we collecting and how are we asking the questions, right? Like, I know one of the things, you know, we have our set of questions that we ask. They don't really align with the recommendations from MLT. You know, our folks are a little reluctant to kind of change our questions because we have the history of response there. But I think those little things we have to be willing to do and to try, because this is obviously well researched and vetted. And I think to really develop good root causes, I think we just have to fine tune some of our input or some of our information so that we are, I mean, we do have some assumptions on things that I think we'll look to kind of test out through some of the root cause work. But I also think it will require that we more finely hone the input that we're putting into the process. And do we have the right listening in place? Are we asking the right questions of the right people in the right way, and really understanding the data better than we do today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think of it as a yes and. I was going to say, it's asking the questions recommended by MLT, right? And we also then, it made us think differently about the previous questions that we had been asking. And so it is, can we, yes, make sure we have the MLT ones, and can we tweak the ones that we had before that helps us still be able to track, but yet get even more information to drive the next steps that we need to do. So I look at it, Janice, as a yes and. So
that's helpful.
Yes, we're facilitating space of collaboration. This was our purpose. So I'm so excited. So thinking about collaboration, let's kind of shift. We'll shift in two directions, actually, because Ellen, you and Janice are in different places in the journey, which I think is really great for this conversation. So for Janice, let's go backwards. So right now we're talking about developing the plan, getting to the point of being able to identify root causes. I'm so curious to hear about your process of collecting the data, right? We talked about that being the foundational first step. So curious to know, hear about your experience of collecting all of that data. How was it, pulling in, I know from working with partners, they have to pull data from different places. So curious to know about your process, but then also as you're thinking about answering it, curious to know about how you found the collaboration with MLT in helping you facilitate getting to the understanding where you are. And then I'll come back for
Yeah. Sure. The one observation that I would share to those of you who haven't started the process that was a bit of a surprise to me was, and one of the things that I do is I fill out all of our sort of diversity recognition questionnaires, right? So Diversity Inc. and some of the different sort of external award applications, and some of them are like 90 pages of data that they're looking for and questions. So I will tell you what sort of surprised me when we started the baseline assessment process was how truly focused the information and the data that MLT was asking for the baseline assessment. It really is focused on what are the things that matter, that are going to move the dial. It's not give us everything you possibly track related to your diversity representation or your culture. I was really surprised how finely tuned of a list it was. That was a surprise to me because I thought it would take us like 9 months of full-time trying to pull different pieces of data. And it wasn't easy, I'm not saying that, but it was, it's clearly, once you get into it, you feel how specific it is to the things that have been identified as really sort of moving the dial. I think, I'll share with you, one of the things I think we could have done a better job of internally at Citizens when we started the process is getting all those stakeholders together on the front end and taking them through the whole process. We kind of like, okay, go. And the DE&I team, we were out and we were talking to people and we were pulling the data. Then when it came time to sort of review the baseline results, that's when we kind of got all the stakeholders on the phone and they were really, I think, fully understanding the process, et cetera, for the first time. I don't know if others have experienced this, but, people, we were going through the baseline and starting the conversation, it was like our plan kickoff, and I was getting like instant messages from like, somebody from philanthropy, like, how did we get a 0 there? Like, we do so much and so well. So then it's taking a step back and understanding sort of what drives points, right? It's not just grants, it's so really kind of getting that understanding. I think if we could go back in time and just do a lot more on the front end with all of the stakeholders, like the DE&I team, we were all super clear on the process and how it was going to work. I think we didn't do a great job bringing our stakeholders along with us in that initial step, which was an internal thing. So now, as we start to develop the plan, we're really going to sit down with supplier diversity and the philanthropy team and, HR business, really kind of take people through the certification guides to understand why these things matter, because I tend to hear a lot of, yeah, but we don't track it that way. It's like, okay, but maybe that's part of the problem, right? Like, they're not going to customize the assessment for us because the assessment is what the assessment is for a very specific reason. So that's been sort of interesting, and I'm like beyond excited for this next phase where we do kind of, the other great thing I think in the planning process is it moves it from the DE&I team into the specific areas, right? Like the planning is very inclusive of, if we choose to really focus on supplier diversity, they're central to that plan. It's not something where we're just coming up with something and then saying to them, like, let's do better, you know? So I'm excited about the process that's ahead, and learned a lot in the baseline assessment process about sort of just the way that we need to think about it in the work ahead.
Thank you for sharing that. And for a bit of crystal ball action, let's go to Ellen, who has gone through the plan development process twice now, as you are a certified partner. So you have gone through your initial year, plan approved. Congratulations. Yes. Your year of equity, and you've also developed a year 2 plan. So I'm curious to hear from you how the process has been for thinking through, once you've identified the root cause, thinking about what were some of the activities that you came up to when it came to solving, and then also you can talk about your collaboration with me and Alex, who's also on the call as well.
Yeah. So very different than Janice. We at, most of you, I think, know us for Harvard Business Review. That is actually 1/3 of our business. So we are a nonprofit. We are affiliated with Harvard University, of course, but we only have 590 employees globally, approximately 450 here in the US. So we don't have a philanthropic team, and we don't have a supplier diversity team. We don't have any of those things. It was basically like Ellen and whoever I could get to help. And so now I actually have a team of 3 other people, but at the time, the first plan was just me. And so I say that because, to Janice's point, what's so cool about this, though, is a very targeted approach. So it's like, here's what we're going to focus on and why. And then I stole this from our CHRO, but what we have been doing is we have continued to crowdsource for help. So it's like, okay, we actually created defined projects to help support this work, the core work. And then I send out like an all staff email. Again, I have the luxury of doing that because we only have, less than 600 people. And then people can actually kind of apply to be on a team to help move a piece of the work forward. And so that's what was so fantastic about this, was being able to pull in people from across the globe that supported this work and help move the work forward. What I will say is we've also had some turnover, to be quite frank, in our HR ranks. And so who originally we partnered with on Plan 1 is very different than who we were able to partner with later the second time around, which has been much greater, to be honest. And so we have a CHRO now and a whole new HR team that is all about the people. So it's made it much better to be able to infuse in the people processes. What I will say that both Crystal and Shannon have continued to challenge me personally is they're like, we need more specificity. We need you to give examples of these things, and have challenged me to actually go back and recognize and be able to articulate the good work, because you do so much and you're going from day to day that sometimes you forget about the details of the good work that we've done. So I appreciate the back and forth. And I think with Alex and Shannon, at one point I sent you like an email, probably like 11 o'clock at night one night, when I was trying to wrap some stuff up, going, thank you for the feedback, because like, you're right. I need to be better at this. So I say that because it truly is a partnership. I don't feel like I'm in trouble. It is like, no, we are all trying to help us succeed and be better at this. And one of the things that has continued to help us drive this, and the initial challenge I had up front was, the focus. Now I know there is a Hispanic plan, et cetera, but like the focus was, why Blacks? Why are we solely doing this work for Blacks? We all on this call know the obvious answer to that. But from the business case, what might be helpful is, from the book Unleashed with Frances Fry and Ann Morris, Dr. Livingston at the Kennedy School also has research on this, is that if your organization is equitable for Black women, then it's equitable for all, period, right? And I apologize if I'm stating the obvious, and I'm happy to follow up if anybody wants to get the specific data on that piece or the quotes from those particular publications. But that's really it. You know, when we're doing a pay equity audit, for example, which we've done for the first time, you know, we're not looking at just two ethnicities and races. We're looking at everybody. And so everybody wins, because if anybody had a shortcoming, they got bumped, right? So it's one of those things where we're looking to drive an equitable organization for all, so that everybody can be celebrated and cherished here. And that's kind of what has driven as far as our plan. What I will also say too is, I'm like, oh yeah, no, you can, you know, before you even can say we got this score, you have to prove up your plan for the next year, because MLT ain't playing. Like, it's not like you can be like, oh, check the box. Like, no, girl. Like, you got to like make sure that you keep momentum going and you keep going. And I love that, because that's how it should be. You can't just like, yeah, none of us are in this to check the box, or we wouldn't be on this call today, right? So.
Yes. So thank you so much for sharing that and being mindful of the time. Going to wrap us. So first, I want to thank all of you for participating. I saw some moments of collaboration. I've been looking at the chat. I've been seeing so many affirming messages. I see the folks on camera nodding in agreement and in solidarity. So thank you all for your transparency and openness in the space. So thinking about closing us out, I want to do a quick round robin. If you had one big picture, if you had a headline, one thing that you wanted folks on the call to take away from our earlier discussion around retaining diverse talent, or your experience with the program or with MLT, would love to hear that. I'm going to start with Erica. We haven't heard from you in a while. So we'll start with Erica and then we'll move past.
And I'm so sorry, Shannon, you cut out for me for a minute.
Oh, I was just saying, I was thanking you all for creating space, but I also wanted to just hear if you had a headline, the one thing you want people to take away from the call, what would it be?
Thank you. I love how you started with me. So on the fly, I think that it's maybe not, can it be like 3 headlines? So this takes a lot of intentional work getting specific on what your organization needs to do and commits to do. And 2, so thank you, Janice and Alan, for those examples of what you're doing. And then 2, I'm just going to go back to the very beginning, which is what Crystal and Anise said on, we're not here to play checkers, we're here to play chess. Retention is a game of chess. It is complicated and a long game.
Thank you for that. Janice.
So I would say, you know, I think the intentionality that Erica just talked about is really the one thing that I think is so central to this, right? And so I would say that, and I think, you know, we look at it as like really sort of opening the aperture on how we look at some of these things, right? In terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion across our organization, and just having the tools. That's what it really comes down to, right? Is having specific tools. It's not just guessing about things or talking about where we need to do better. It's having really specific tools and prioritizing, right? Like, we are not going to go from where we are today to a perfect score in a year. We may not get, you know, anywhere near it in 3 years, but we want to make progress every year. So I think that that's the way to think about it, is that, you know, intentional, planful progress year over year that keeps us moving in the right direction, versus aspiring to win some prize out there.
Right.
That it's just about moving forward and progressing it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's exactly right, Janice. And progressing in a way that is sustainable, right? I think that's so critical. The two things that come to mind to me are transparency and to not underestimate the power of your workforce. So transparency, because our first score, which I won't say publicly, was embarrassingly low, but not at all surprising. And so, and I remember you might all know, some of you might know Adi Ignatius, our executive editor in chief. He actually said his immediate response was, "So when do we share this with our employees?" And I was like, "Oh, it's not about if or when, or not about if, but it's like when. So when do we share this with our employees?" That then, and being that level of transparency built started really building a lot of trust with our employees. Then that gave me then the opening I needed to then ask for assistance. Who would like to help us in these particular areas? And one of the first hands that was raised was our CFO, calling me and going, "So should we talk to JP Morgan Chase that holds our cash reserve about diversifying and getting it with Black owned banks?" Yes, Paul, let's do that. Right. So surprisingly, when I thought it would be this hard sell after that initial, "Here's why we need to do this and why," it's amazing on how our employees want to lean into this work and do the right things right for the greater cause. And so that's probably one of the biggest and most proud moments of this entire journey, is being able to report out to Shannon, "Yep, Shannon, that says 50% of our cash reserve is held with two Black owned banks, not 5%, but 50." And that's not because of me. That is because of Paul and our treasurer, Steve, who were like, "Wait a minute, we can do better than that." And it's like, yeah. So I say that. So don't underestimate the power of your employees, regardless of their level, but it takes you being transparent first to be able to then generate that excitement and commitment.
Thank you. I was actually in the middle of typing all of the praises in the chat. So thank you all for sharing today. I'm going to pass it back over to Stephanie.
Great.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. So first, before people start hanging up, I want to thank Crystal so much for putting this all together, and for Shannon and Janice and Ellen and Erica. This was really compelling and engaging and specific. I'm so excited. That's what I loved so much when I first came across the MLT program quite a while ago, was that just that it's so specific. And, you know, I don't need to say more because you've all just given testimonial to that. And I will say, Ellen, you mentioned that you do have more insight into explaining if you're equitable for Black women, you're equitable for all. I would love to hear what you have on that, because I think so much of this is about, no, it doesn't mean that we think they're the most important group, but there's a science in there to it of some, right? And articulating that to people, you know, it's like human rights are women's rights, and women's rights, well, what does that really mean? You know, when Hillary Clinton says that, right? And how do you prove that to people? So I would love a follow-up on that. And everyone else, thank you for hanging with us for a 2-hour session. It was great. It is recorded. We will be sharing the recording, the presentation, and look forward to the continued dialogue. So thank you, everyone. Have a fabulous afternoon. And I hope to see everyone again soon.